Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's Grant Cameron, and I have another super guest, and I have my co-host, Sinead Willahan, with me from Toronto. Hello, Sinead.
Hi there, Grant, and I'm very, very happy to have Candace here too.
Yes, Candice Powers is with us. We both had contact. Candice appears in almost all my rabbit hole videos, and she is a co-founder of Boulder EXO, where I've lectured a number of times. Was there for on the board for 9 years, and she lives in just outside of Boulder, Colorado. And I met her, I believe she can correct me, about 2013. After the lectures, everybody goes to dinner, and I guess I was sitting beside her or something, and she started telling stories, and I went, "Whoa, this is a really cool person." And from then, she's always she and I have had a lot of contact over the years, and people that know me know I'm into weird stories. I like really interesting stories, and I don't think I've ever met anybody who has as many interesting stories as Candace. So we've had a lot of contact over the years, and it doesn't seem to, it's almost every subject I've gotten into, whether it's orbs or reports or downloads, inspiration. Candace has always had some sort of story or that she's been able to tell me. So I want to welcome Candace to this little discussion we're going to have today. And I've got a lot of questions, but they're basically questions that I probably asked you before, because every time I get on a rabbit hole, somebody will bring up a subject and I'll say, "Oh, Candace has got a story about this. Candace, tell them this story." So Candace has never really been open with this. She's never gone public with it, but she's been forced by me over the years to tell various parts of her story to various people. So welcome, Candace, and thank you for giving us the time and being open enough to come and discuss your life with us.
Thank you, Grant. Great to be here.
Beautiful. So let's go back to how it all starts for you. I like to, because you have a lot of experiences. Where does the sort of life begin where you realize you're not quite the same as everybody else, where strange things are happening? Because you started as a singer, correct? You have a, not the pattern you're in now, but you started in, not in Colorado, you started in Texas. Is that correct?
Well, no. Actually, I started at the age of 14. I started performing professionally at 14, and I had experiences. Well, I had an experience at 14. I had another one at 11. Had a pretty impactful event that happened, series of events when I was 11, and I was doing things at 11 on a musical level, you know. So the music goes back pretty far.
And you were in Nashville,
you know,
correct?
Yeah, I was in Nashville for 6 months. Mm-hmm.
And then you had, I talked to you about this before. Clarify for me the trauma thing, because you had a trauma event at what, 16, which sort of ended your singing career. But I always ask people, because you know I'm into big into the thing that there's always seems to appear to be something that sort of breaks the veil, you know, throws the person into this other world. So talk about that in terms of your life experience.
Yeah, I had a big car accident when I was 16, and actually I was 17. Get that straighter. I was actually 17, and then, you know, I had also a head injury when I was 14. So the age of 14 was pretty impactful in terms of having these different experiences and things happen, you know, between head trauma and then anomalous events that were going on. I had an anomalous event when I was 14 that definitely told me straight up that something else, you know, was going on, and that was a visitation in my bedroom by a light and a sound that I couldn't identify. Just terrified me. And then I had some missing time with that as well, because the way it unfolded, was, you know, I woke up and this light was coming into my room, and it was just, you know, coming in and going out, and coming in and going out. And there was a dormer window, you know, that had a slant. It was slanted like that, so you couldn't actually see the window. You could just see the slanted wall, and then the window was on the other side of it. And so from the window, though, was coming this light, and along with it was this really strange buzzing sound that I couldn't figure out. And yeah, I was scared, and so I put my blanket over my head and ran past, because you had to go past the window to get to the door. So I ran past the window to the door, and then went downstairs, because I lived in the maid's quarters, which I chose to do. We lived on an army base there, so you know, it was totally separate from the house. And I ran downstairs, and from there I don't remember anything. So that's really the bizarre part. I don't remember. I think I must have woke my mom and dad up. That's what I have told myself over the years. I must have done that, you know, but I don't have any memory of that at all. So, you know, and then the next day, of course, I investigated as far as I could in terms of, was there a storm? Was there any electrical wires outside the window that might have been, you know, doing something to make that? But I had had experiences even before that that were much stranger than that, which I won't even go into here. But
well, give us the first one. Give us the first one that you said, 1 at 11, right? So tell us about that one.
Yeah. That was not an ET experience. It was an experience with a Korean karate master who performed miracles.
I remember this story. Tell me,
Yeah.
this is a good story. Tell this story. I remember this.
Yeah. Well, so I used to sneak into the gym. We lived on a base in Korea.
Are you in Korea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I lived in Korea as a child, because my dad was in the military, and I used to sneak into the gym to watch the soldiers training in karate with the Korean master. I was just fascinated by it, and I got caught in there one day, and they wanted to know what I was doing, and I told them I just love this stuff, and so I mean, they actually he gave me a little test, and then he said it was okay. He checked it out with my parents and all of that, and I got okay to train with the GIs with the karate master, which was, I mean, and then later on they allowed other kids to do this too, but I was the first one, and so that was pretty cool. But I witnessed him do some things that just were pretty mind-blowing, and I can't help but think that that happened because it was part of my path. You know, it was just part of preparation for me to see these things, to experience these things, for what I was doing in my life later. That's what I've come to believe. Yeah, so I witnessed him drive a nail through his foot. And then pull it out, and there was no blood, there was no injury. Saw him do that. I saw him pick up a hot coal from a bucket of coals that was like fire white ash hot, and hold it in his hand like that, and then drop it and brush the ash off, and no burn. You know, yeah. So and some other things. I saw some other things too, which you know. Pretty astounding stuff, and that, I think, set me up with the understanding, or at least with the idea, that there's a lot more to life than we think. So that was kind of the base, right, for my later opening. Apparently, and I've always thought too that maybe I had head injuries because I was so thick-headed. Needed to get this stuff, you know, knocked out so this other stuff could come in. But I got a lot of help along the way to open, you know, me to these other experiences.
what do you put it down to? Like you're saying, you're getting help. So you're talking about the experience at 14, and it
Yeah.
starts to unfold. So maybe give us some examples of where your path is sort of guided for you, and you're led down towards where you are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think in terms of synchronicities, I think if you're on your path, right, that all the important things that happen are synchronistic. From meeting people that introduce you to people that change your life, to having anomalous types of experiences, signs, that show up that give you the right message at the right time. Those kinds of things, I think, are part of anybody's path. And, just depending on what your path is, you receive these things to help you open. And so I had a lot of those, and throughout my life. And I guess probably when I started to feel like my life was going down this paranormal anomalous path, that seemed to be, the direction that things were going. Because I thought, I was going to be a professional musician for the rest of my life. I thought, that was my path. And then these things kept intervening, including the car accident. I see that as a positive, actually. That needed to happen so that I could stop and take in what was going on. I was unconscious for 3 days with that accident when I was 17. And, my life was totally different after that, from things that I saw and things that happened, and a lot of anomalous events and that sort of thing.
Did you have
So,
a near-death experience during that event?
sorry?
Did you have a near-death experience during that?
Not that I remember, no. No, but I was just gone. I was gone, and then another accident I had in 1995, same thing happened. I was gone for 13 hours. I don't know where I went. I don't know what was happening, but I wasn't there. And so, I think these things are all part and parcel to what your soul is up to. Whatever path you're on, these things occur to help you awaken. And I think that's, for me, that's the whole purpose. We all want to find our purpose, what our purpose is, but I think the overall purpose of oneness is to awaken to oneness.
Yeah, to remember who we were.
Yes.
Or who we are. Yeah.
Who we are. Yeah. What we are, even. Yeah.
Now you and I have known each other through the UFO world, but you didn't really know the UFO connection. Correct me if I'm wrong, till you had the rabbit experience and your boyfriend sort of cues you in.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go with that. I think that's your most famous story. I probably made you tell it a half dozen times. So tell it one more time. Tell us the rabbit story.
The rabbit story, yeah. So this was 1975, and this was before I was introduced to any UFO things. And I was living on a tract of land, which I think is 640 acres or something like that, where you have crossroads, but in between the crossroads there's miles. I don't know how many miles, but anyway, I was performing in the town that was nearby our home, and I got home about 2:00 in the morning. Was when I was coming home, and I was driving. I just turned off the main road onto the dirt road that led down to down this tract of land to the road that I would have to turn on to get to my house. And about, just a minute or so after I turned on to this road, I saw something sitting in the middle of the road. And of course, these old country roads are pretty narrow, and there was fields on either side of this road, and just like little ditches, along the side of the road. And so because this was sitting right in the middle of the road, I couldn't really go around it to get past it. So I just stopped and saw that it was a rabbit that was sitting in the middle of the road. And so I thought, oh, well, it's not moving because it's scared because of the lights and so forth. So I just turned the lights off. I stopped the car and I turned the lights off and just thought, okay, I'll wait and it'll move, you know. So I turned the lights back on. It was still sitting there, but when I turned the lights back on, then it started to move. So it started to hop down the road, and it went all the way down, and we went this way. And so I thought, okay, at least it's going. Maybe if I start going, then it'll, you know, jump off to the side or something. It'll get off the road, you know, eventually. So it didn't. It just stayed right in the middle of the road. And so I was forced to just follow this rabbit, you know, down the road in this manner. And I would stop occasionally. And when I would stop, it would stop and wait. And then I'd start going and it would go.
And this was quite a while, right? This is quite a few minutes this takes place, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm not sure how far a tract of land, if you were to measure the length of road between the crossroads. I don't know what that is, but it seemed like it went on for miles. That's what it seemed like, you know.
You to end up in Wonderland.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we go like this, and I'm like, you know, geez, rabbit, what's the deal? And so we get all the way down to the crossroad where I'm supposed to turn. And I thought, oh, good. At least I'll, you know, be able to turn. That rabbit can go on about its business. And so just before the turn, he's in front of me. It jumps into the ditch, which is full of grass and stuff, you know, disappears. Oh, good. Yay, that's done. So I make my turn. I turn right to go down the road to my house, and there's the rabbit sitting in the middle of the road. Yeah. And so this rabbit led me all the way to the house. Yeah. And now I'm getting concerned. I'm thinking, oh, this is an insane rabbit because I have two really big dogs that are outside and he's going to get eaten, you know? So, I slowed down even more. And just as we got up to where the yard starts in my house, where the dogs would have surely jumped that rabbit, it jumped into the bushes or into the weeds there and disappeared. And that was that, right? So, but that house, I mean, it's a strange story, definitely a strange story, but a lot of people have strange animal stories. So I didn't think too much of it other than, wow, that was weird, you know. Yeah, a weird animal story. And but then there were other things that happened in that house, and one of which was we left one day and left the dogs locked in the house because we were going to be gone for a little while. And when we got back, the dogs were outside. And in the kitchen, it was an old-fashioned farmhouse kitchen, you know, that had a high sink. And above the sink, there was a double-paned window. And there was a hole in the top pane of the window that was perfectly round. And there was a screen on the window, too. So the hole was cut through the glass and through the screen, perfectly round. And the dogs were outside. Yeah. And it was like, okay, so you're trying to figure out, well, could the dogs have jumped up on the sink and then jumped straight up and done a 90-degree turn? No, right? That could not have happened. So, so that was really strange. That was really strange. And yeah, and we had other things happening in the house. But anyway, that's, you know, we could talk a while about that one. So. But that's the rabbit story.
Yeah, but but then your boyfriend, basically, when you tell him the story, isn't that when he tells you, I think you better get regressed, and that's when you suddenly find out what's going on?
The way this happened, see, so this is what I'm saying, is synchronistic. So that rabbit story happened in 1975, right? So in between 75 and 87, I get divorced and I moved to another place in Dallas, and I meet my boyfriend at the time, and I tell him the rabbit story. Well, he happens to be connected with the people who were running the Dallas chapter of MUFON. So he introduces me to Cheyenne Turner, who was leading it at that time. And he tells her the rabbit story. She says, oh, Bud Hopkins is coming, and you need to tell that story to Bud Hopkins. Well, I'm thinking, oh, this is just all a bunch of, I'm like, this is crazy. What are you all talking about? But that began a really bizarre series of events that included Carla Turner and all these things being regressed by Bud Hopkins and meeting Carla Turner, and then bizarre stuff happening as a result of that. And it all came from that rabbit story. See, so it's interesting how these things line up that you wouldn't think would be connected.
And what does the rabbit turn out to be?
Sorry.
What did the rabbit story turn out to be?
Okay, so I got regressed by Bud, and I told him the rabbit story, and I had also by that time had a couple of other things that had happened. Well, one thing that happened had to do with my son, where I witnessed a being that rose up out of my 8-year-old child. So I told Bud about that too. But I'd had another experience in 1988 in which, and this is when I was regressed by Bud, was in 88. And I'd had another experience by then. At least I think it had happened by the time I was regressed by him. And maybe it hadn't, and that's why I didn't tell him. I get this a little confused. The timing of things gets a little, muddy for me. But I had had an experience of having a being appear in my room that I thought was the Virgin Mary. And I'm not religious, I was working on a project in my bedroom, sitting in my chair, and all of a sudden I have this strange feeling, and I look up, and there's across the room, there's this being standing there with its back to me, and all I'm seeing is the white headdress and the gown, that looks like if you had a statue of the Virgin Mary and looked at it from behind, it would look like that. And of course I didn't even have time to think. I was just sort of shocked. I was in a state of shock looking at this, and then it turned around, and when it turned around, it was a being that was had snow white skin, skeletal thin, tall, and had blue eyes that were almond shaped, and there was this light, this blue light coming out of the eyes. And so, clearly not the Virgin Mary. But it didn't last very long, as far as I know. It was just like, I'm looking at it, it's looking at me. There's no words, there's no thoughts, there's no transmission of any kind, right? And then suddenly it's gone. And somewhere around that time, so this whole time period from the time I met my boyfriend, all this was happening. Yeah. So I met him in 87. And then these things just progressed. I had the being in my room. I had the thing with Josh, with the being coming up out of there, that was actually before I met him. Oh, and I forgot. See, this is so many things, so Josh and I had an experience. I should tell this story first, yeah, and then I'll get to Bud Hopkins and what he discovered, what came out of the rabbit story. Is that okay?
Yeah. This is.
I do it that way.
This is riveting.
Yeah. When my son Josh was, I should say I got pregnant with Josh right after the rabbit story. I don't know if this, so I'm just saying that. So then on his 9th birthday, I had already divorced, and I was living in my parents' home in Cedar Hill, Texas, and it was his 9th birthday, and I had a friend who brought her 2 kids over for his birthday party, and the rest of my family was all there, and we were all in the house. And party was over. She was leaving with her kids, and we were standing out on the front porch. Well, we lived on 5 acres, and across the road there was, like 100 acres place over there, and so we're standing on the porch, and all of a sudden we see this gold triangle in the sky, and it's spinning in place like that. And in the middle of it, kind of like, one of those triangular rulers that has the center cut out, it looked like that. That's how it looked to me. And it was spinning in place. And so we're all standing there going, wow, what is that? And so start yelling for the people in the house to come out, and nobody came out. And we're like, hey, you guys, come look at this, come look at this. Nobody would come out of the house. And so as it spun, the faster it spun, the smaller it got. Started getting faster and faster, and then it got smaller and smaller until it was just a speck. And by the time it was a speck, my brother came out and said, "What's all in all?" And by then it, of course, was gone. And so that happened in '85. And right after that happened, like within days of that sighting, my son Josh, and I've asked his permission to share this. He said okay. He became obsessed with the Titanic, and he wanted to get books on it. He wanted to see the movie. He wanted, and he was just totally obsessed with the Titanic. And I said, well, what's going on? Why do you, And he said, they're going to find it, Mom. They're going to find it. And he told me this every day. And he would cry, and he would get really insistent and upset and tell me, they're going to find it. They're going to find it. So the Titanic was discovered on September 1st, 1985, which was like, his birthday was August 19th. So within a month, the Titanic was found. And of course, as soon as they found it, I was like, Josh, they found the Titanic. You should be really happy. You're so into it. And totally lost interest. Completely lost interest. Once they found it, he had absolutely no interest in the Titanic after that, which was really interesting. Yeah. So, that was an interesting thing. And then right along that time, and I don't know if we have time, if you want me to share all of this. This is a lot. So, so somewhere in that neighborhood, then this same friend came to visit me, and we were in the house, and she and my sister and I decided to take a trip to the store to get some things to come back. And on the way back from the store, and it's pretty much dark. It's almost completely dark, but you can still see a little bit. And we're driving down the road, and all of a sudden, I see this being standing on the side of the road, and it's standing upright. It doesn't look like a bear, but it does look like a bear. I mean, it's hairy, totally hairy, and huge. And so I yell, oh my gosh, what is that? Stop. And my sister says, I didn't see that. She's like, I'm not stopping. I'm not turning around because I didn't see that. And so this is a bizarre story, actually. So just bear with me here. But so we get back to the house. She doesn't stop. We keep going. We get back to the house, and of course my friend too was yelling stop. She saw something, and we get back to the house, and everybody's like, "Where the heck have you been? What took you so long to go to the store?" So apparently we had missing time. We'd been gone for way longer than we should have been, to go to the store. And but we didn't tell anybody about what had just happened. Nobody said anything. Nobody told anybody about what we had just seen on the road. And so a year later, I'm talking to my friend about the triangle event. And, I said, hey, you remember when we saw that? And she goes, yeah. And so her description of it was totally different than mine. She saw it had sparklers. It was, throwing stuff all over the place. And I didn't see any of that, And of course, Josh remembers it vividly too. He has a very clear memory of it. And she said, but she says, yeah, that was interesting. She says, but how about that thing we saw on the road? And I said, you mean beside the road? She goes, no. She says, it was going, don't you remember? It was going across the road. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So what she saw was something that looked kind of black and leathery that was proceeding across the road in front of the car. And it had, now see, this is probably her brain, how it hooks up with the triangle or something. I don't know, but she said it had triangular shaped legs, which doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah, I know. So it had triangular shaped legs, and it was moved. The legs were going up on a point, down on the side, up on a point, down on the side. That's how it was, getting across the road.
That is the first I've ever heard of any kind of being having triangular legs. I don't know about you, Grant.
Yeah, you and me both. So I think that was part of how her brain somehow was combining these two events. I've always thought that. I've always thought that this is what, she was so astounded by the triangular event that that she then somehow, mixed it up with this other one. But I said, no, I said, it was standing on the side of the road and it was hairy. It wasn't leathery. No, it was leathery. And it, so we had completely different experiences with that. So that's interesting to me. I find that interesting because it seems like whatever it is that's going on with all of this, with these anomalous events, because you hear stories about people standing right next to each other. One of them sees a mile-long craft, the other one sees nothing. So there's something having to do with frequency. It seems like wherever you're tuned in or wherever you're being, I don't want to say tapped. I want to say connected with is personal. There's a personal element to it for sure.
Just to jump in there, because I know Sinead wants to ask a question, and we want to get to this finish the rabbit story.
Yes.
And you're not letting me down. I mean, this is why you've interested me for so many years, because you just have so many interesting stories. But the question, I mean, you brought up this thing about what people see different. If you remember the 2014 Zendra story at Shasta, the way I was told it was everybody was in the Zendra with Aunt Terrell standing there, and everybody's looking at Aunt Terrell, but everybody's having a different experience. Paul is hearing him yak in some foreign language. The other woman's getting a download message about something, and it's completely different experiences, and they're all standing like 20 yards or 20 feet away from this being standing there. And so that's that idea where we sort of don't realize that our mind is part of what we're seeing. We think it's an independent object affecting us. And in fact, we keep forgetting that we're part of the experience. So go on.
Yeah, well, and I would just add to that too, that it seems like, our consciousness, our brains, the way our brains filter the consciousness, it is so individualized too. I mean, think of the filters that things have to go through to get out, you know what I mean? For us to even receive things, it's going through a lot of filters, from past lives, from this life, from who knows. Yeah, so.
And even just related to when you go to Bud, it's this idea of screen imaging as well, because that's what the rabbit turns out to be. It wasn't a rabbit at all. So tell that story of how that ends and your connection with Bud Hopkins, who was probably the foremost guy doing regressions in terms of alien abductions.
Right.
He also had the perfect name for a rabbit. I just want to point that out.
What?
Bud Hopkins.
Oh, Bud. Very good, Sinead. That's a little levity there. It's good. Thank you. Okay, so so then so all that's background for when I meet my boyfriend and he introduces me to MUFON people, and then Bud comes, and but there's a little other piece underneath that one that I'll get to in a minute. But when I meet Bud, and he's supposed to lecture on Saturday night. So he and I had a regression on Friday. And what came out of that was an abduction experience, of course. And apparently two men, I was driving along the road and I saw this craft ahead and I stopped the car, and these two men approached the car and they were wearing one-piece overalls. And in the regression, actually, I saw this as an observer. I wasn't experiencing it as though it were happening, like some people do. There's different, I understand different ways that happens.
Yeah, because as I recall, you were questioning why the one guy went to the passenger door. Isn't that part of the story? Like you were saying, why is this guy going to the passenger door?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's these two guys, and one of them comes to the passenger door, and the other one comes to my door, and I open the door. He opens the other door, and I just get out. It's just like, okay, here we go. And I just go with this guy. There's no struggle. There's no nothing. I just get out of the car. And then the next thing I remember, I'm on the craft, and the craft has got circular hallways, and there's no sharp edges anywhere. Everything's rounded, and the hallways are like pewter-like color, and they're rounded. And so we're moving along, but I'm not walking. I'm like gliding, sort of gliding, and we go around, these hallways until we get to this room, and it's an all-white room, and in there this examination apparently takes place. And so when I came out of that regression, and maybe this was because I was viewing it as an observer rather than as a participant, but I had less confidence in that story. So I was up all night. I didn't sleep all night long. I was like, what the hell? At this point, this is my first introduction to abductions. I hadn't heard anything like that before. And I questioned it. Well, before I left the day before on Friday, Bud was just all excited, and he said, "Oh yeah," he says, "I've got some controls." He says, "There are some things that I don't ever tell anybody, so that we can see if the person is really, an abductee or not." And he said, "I met those controls, and he had people in New York he was going to hook me up with, and that could, help me go further with what we were doing." And I'm just like in a daze. I'm not even, really registering any of that much. But he wanted me to come back the next morning for a second regression. So when I showed up, I knocked on the door. He opened the door, and he was staying with these people. And he was all smiles and ready to go. And I was like, hadn't had any sleep at all. And I was like totally questioning, totally not trusting what had just happened. And I said, I just don't know if I believe any of this. And his face just fell. He was just so disappointed. And he said, "Well, let's go ahead and go in and do that." So then he asked me if I would come the next day. No, on Sunday. He was giving a lecture the next day. Would I come on Sunday to the workshop that he was giving and just describe the process of regression? And he said, "You don't have to talk about anything, personal, but just, talk about it." Like, okay. So I did. I showed up on Sunday, and that's how I met Carla Turner, because Carla Turner and Barbara Barthlick were at that workshop, and I was really nervous about speaking, to this group, and so I went to the bathroom. And they kind of cornered me in the bathroom. and they asked me if I had been at John Lear's lecture the year before. And I'm like, yeah, I was there. And well, where were you? You know, where, you know, so I had to think about it. And I thought, oh, well, it was really, really hot because he came, I think, in August, Lear did, and it was super hot, and the place was packed, and it was in a hotel conference room, you know, and it was a pretty huge room, actually, really big, and it had 2 double doors on either side of the room. And so I was standing at the front of the room, and I was part of MUFON, you know, at this point. So, you know, I mean, I wasn't just there as a participant, as a you know, there for the lecture strictly. So so I was standing at the front of the room by those doors to watch John Lear speak, and so I told him, oh, well, we've been looking for you for, you know, 7 months, 9 months, whatever it was. We've been looking for you, and we need to talk to you, and all this. Apparently, turned out her son's friend, best friend, had been having these experiences that were terrifying him, in which he saw this woman who appeared to him on multiple occasions, and she appeared sometimes just her hands, sometimes her head in her hands, sometimes in full body, and sometimes fully in the flesh. He told one story where he was on his way to St. Louis, and outside of St. Louis, he got this, and it was at nighttime, and he got this strong feeling that he should turn off the road and drive up this side road. So he did, and when he got there, there's this woman, and she is talking to him and telling him that she's for real and all of this. And before this, she had been giving him visions and showing him scenes of things that, of the future, of catastrophes and things like that, that really terrified him. And so she said, I just wanted you to know I'm real. And she said, your girlfriend right now is having a conversation with your best friend, and this is what they're talking about. And you can, you know, check this out. You can, you know, go check this out afterwards. So he did, and sure enough, that conversation took place, and you know, there was no doubt in his mind then that, yeah, there's something, this was real. So anyway, he claimed that I was that woman. That's what he said. Yeah, right. That's what I said. That's exactly what I did. I look just like that, Sinead.
Triangular? Yeah. That's all I want to know. Were your legs triangular as well?
Yeah. So this is, yeah. So
that's really amazing. And I'm joking, but that really is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It was pretty weird, especially when all this other stuff was happening. You know, I'm getting regressed by Bud, and this is all happening, and then that happens. You know, right in that same weekend, and she says. She said that the reason the John Lear lecture was important is because she and her husband, Elton Turner, and their son were present at that lecture with his friend. And that his friend saw me up at the front of the room there, and just turned white as a ghost and got, you know, all kinds of freaked out, and said, that's her. And then he went up to find me. Well, I just left. I didn't, you know, disappear. He claims that I just dematerialized. You know, that didn't happen. I just, you know, I just left the, you know. So that he was convinced. He was totally convinced that I was that woman that had been visiting him. And so, you know, I mean, we went through a whole thing where, and that's how I got hooked up with Carla. And we went through this whole thing where I actually came to her house, and I met her son's friend, and, you know, and he was completely freaked out, couldn't look me in the eye, couldn't talk to me. And then he said, that's not her, and he left the room. You know, so I thought, good, yay, that's done, right? So, yeah. And but you have to wonder, well, why did that happen? What was that about? And so then, yeah, that was in '88, right? And by now I'd had the visitation of the being in my room and all of that. And I went to the first UFO conference in Eureka Springs. And at Carla's house too, I had other experiences, weird experiences, and they had some really bizarre experiences. And one thing that happened so I don't know if there was some kind of like poltergeist stuff going on or something in her house as a result of, just the energy that they were generating with all the experiences. But I got a triangle on my heel of my hand appeared while I was in her house. I showed it to her as it was happening. Oh, look at that, and it just kind of came up, this big triangle on the heel of my hand. And then it later disappeared. And
maybe point out Carla Turner became sort of famous for writing some books.
Yeah,
and she was very negative about the whole thing, correct?
She was right. She had a lot of. Yeah, she had a very, very negative experience. She and her husband both, because they'd had these weird kind of poltergeist type experiences, almost like witchcraft stuff going on in her house. And they were terrified by the things that happened. They had helicopters flying over. They had all these strange things. And then her son's friend has this experience with this being, and she was actually an educator. She was a professor at university, and so she was very interested in trying to unpack all of this, but it was affecting her so negatively that her health became really affected. And it seemed to me, this was just what I put together, the more she had these experiences and the more she had a negative response to them, the worse her health became. And she did die of cancer, as a result. I'm not going to say as a result. I'm going to say it certainly didn't help her situation for her to, be viewing all of this as negatively as she was. So she wrote this book, Into the Fringe, and she put the story of her son's friend in there. And she asked me, can I, because she was convinced that I was the person that he had been seeing just from having talked to him, and whatever, even though he denied it later and all of that, she was still convinced that I was that person. And she said, I'm going to put this in my book. And she said, okay, if I use your name. I said, nope, you're not using my name. So I said, but you can call me Anne. How about that? Yeah. So, I'm fine with it now. It doesn't matter. It's it's out of the cage now anyway. So, yeah, so she tells that story, and I'm Anne in the book, and at later times I saw her. She spoke at Eureka Springs at the Ozark, because I went every year after that first time that I went. But I was going to say, on the way to that first event, I had this triangle show up on my hand, the one that had shown up in her house. It came back on the way there, which I thought was pretty strange. And there were other strange things that happened on that trip as well. Yeah, I didn't tell you about that other abduction experience that I had around. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Where my temples were indented, right? I had marks on my face, and I had temples indented, and strange stuff like that happened on that other thing. So, and I didn't tell Bud about that either, which was really weird. So, but anyway,
I don't know if there was a connection going back to the rabbit story, or if the rabbit story is.
Well, what I was saying is that the rabbit story was kind of like an introduction, sort of, to everything. It was like it was the synchronistic thing that connected everything else. Everything flowed from that, right? And so that's why it's all so interesting. In that sense, about the unity and the oneness and the path and all that, to me. And So where was I?
Well, no, just
What
to
am I doing here?
clarify it maybe for Sinead, was the rabbit turns out to be an abduction spread. There was no rabbit. So it's the idea of the
Yeah.
screen where people will see 4-foot tall owls or deers.
Yeah.
But that's the main event where you're basically thrust into this thing. Well, there's aliens involved. This is alien
Yes,
stuff. It's like you
exactly.
just get thrown into the water with that story.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Well, and however, I'm, fairly grounded sometimes, and I, I spoke to Carla at one of these other. I lost contact with her, after a while because things were just so strange. They got so bizarre, and she was very negative about it all, and I just didn't see it that way. I didn't want to see it that way. And so I saw her the last time I saw her was at a conference in Eureka Springs, and her health was really bad. And she said, because she had told me before we parted that she thought I was really going to go through some things, but she said it with this negative tone. I didn't like that. I didn't like that she said it that way. So I guess I just kind of, but I think she was an important person in the field. She brought a lot of really important things out. She was a wonderful person. I really care a lot about her. And of course, she went by Candy Turner then, not Carla.
Can I ask you a question, Candace?
Yeah.
Just about the regression that you were experiencing with Bud Hopkins. Did you find that during these regression experiences, I don't know how many you had with him, but it sounds like there were at least 2.
Just 2. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So during that period of time when you're going through these regressions and learning more about what had happened previously and what's happening to you in general, did you find that during your waking life that things also accelerated? Like, were there more experiences that you
started? Yeah. Oh, definitely. And that's another thing that I think is important to consider, is that that the energy is creative. It's when you have experiences and you focus on them and they ignite your emotions in some way, or you become affected in a big way, that's creative. That energy is creative, or it's attractive, at least. And so then you start to attract more things, for sure. I have noticed that many times. I took a trip also in '87. I went to England, and I had experiences with 3 different people within a period of like 4.5, 5 weeks. These experiences all happen, and with witnesses, all of them with witnesses. And
in the same vein, like, would you say that the head trauma you had when you were 14, and the car accident that sounded very serious when you were 17, did you find that those 2 experiences, because I'm also thinking about the fact that this is in your teenage years, right? And in our teenage years, it's such an interesting time of growth and development in terms of just the physical body and the emotions connected with that. Because when you're a teenager, you start detaching yourself from other people's way of thinking, and you start developing your own, and it kind of stretches your mind a little more to being open to possibilities, right? And then at the same time, you have these 2 traumatic events. Did that also feel like these events slingshotted you forward a bit in terms of your experiences?
Yes, and at the same time, I was trying to have a music career. I I got pregnant and had a child, and so I'm trying to focus on family and music and all these other things. But yeah, I do think that, as I said earlier, that the things that happen to us when we're on our path, are there to sort of propel us forward, to give us opportunity to open so that these other things can happen, so that we continue to move on our path. That's yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it totally does. It's just that sometimes trauma can be something that really shoves you forward, like things happen more dynamically, or a door is maybe more widely opened than when we're just plodding through our daily life and maybe have little things happen to us that we might not be as able to be aware of because we have our body and our system, our mind, everything hasn't been given this jolt of an experience like it is when it goes through trauma.
Right. Well, and also, I would say that the experiences I had when I was 11 kind of opened me already. I was already sort of open to the possibility that the impossible can happen. You know what I mean? So then these other things that were happening, they were all sort of like in concert with everything else that was going on. But when I got to the point where I met Bud and all of that stuff started happening, I mean, even those other things that happened before that, you know, with Josh and everything, I just sort of took it in stride. It was just sort of like, yeah, weird stuff happens, you know? I mean, it's just, it's believable because I've seen it and I know that, you know, these things can happen. But yeah, when I got to the point where the whole idea of abductions and aliens and that sort of thing got in the picture, then it, you know, started to feel different and different things started to happen and different, you know, that rabbit hole got a little deeper.
Can I get you? I don't know if Sinead's got another topic she wants. I want to make sure before you leave, before we finish, we may have to do another interview because you have just so many stories. I need you to tell the Robin story. I mean, the Robin story, and we need to do the abort and the flying the ship before we finish today. Those are things that I'd like to get. But let's do the Robin story because it's sort of the same as the rabbit story. It's like unless you were there, you can't believe this happened.
I know. Yeah, it was the wildest thing. So I was living in this house and in Boulder, Colorado, and I was in school and I was studying and I was in a bit of a dark mood. I was kind of, I don't know, I don't remember the cause or what was going on, but I remember that I was feeling oppressed or depressed or something, and I'm sitting there working, and I'm there's a big plate glass window in front of me, and I hear this bird hit the window. I mean, you know, that's an unmistakable sound. Everybody recognizes that when you hear it. And so I didn't see it, but I heard it, and I thought, oh no, darn! You know, I hate when that happens because I worry about the little birds. And so when it happened, I thought, oh darn, you know. And so then I went back to working, and then I happened to just look up when I saw a second bird hit the window, and then it flew off. It didn't, you know, it just hit the window and flew off just like before, and so I thought, well, that's odd. Two birds within a few minutes of each other hitting the window. You know, that's kind of strange. And then, as I'm thinking that, two doves come and hit the window at the same time. These two doves hit the window and fly off, and so now it's got my attention. Now I'm like, okay, you know, I'm looking around. What's going on? Because I do pay attention to signs and things like that by now. You know, by the time this was happening, I had learned that life is metaphorical, and that you know, when these things happen, there's something engaging, something happening. So I'm sitting there just kind of aghast at this, and as I'm sitting there thinking about it, another bird hits the window, and this one went down and on the ground, and I mean, you know, like I saw it fall below the window. So, oh my gosh, now I'm freaked out. And I go over to the window, and sure enough, this bird is dead. It's laying underneath the window, and I start to cry because, you know, and for some weird reason, and it probably had to do with my mood, I'm kind of taking it like it's my fault in some way. I don't know why I did that, but I did, and I was thinking, you know. It was trying, the universe, something, or using these birds are trying to get my attention. I wasn't paying attention, and now one of them had to die to get, you know, to get my attention. And so I was really kind of beating myself up over that, and I'm crying, and I get up and I walk. It's so strange. I walk into the den. There's a den from the kitchen, there's a kitchen between the living room and the den. So I walk past the kitchen down into the den, and I hear this noise at the patio door. There's a patio door there, and I hear this pecking sound. I look over, and there's a robin, and the bird that had hit the window in the front that died was a robin. And you know, so I'm looking over at this patio door, and there's this robin sitting on the ledge of at the bottom of the patio glass door, and it's pecking the glass. And I'm like, oh my God, you know. So now I'm like really, and I'm already in a state, right? I'm already just like, you know, worked up. And so I go over to this bird. I go over to the thing. I'm looking down at this bird, and you know, birds don't look at you straight; they look at you sideways like that. So it turned its head up like that and looked right at me, and then pecked again on the window. And I was like, you know, so then it flew off, and I opened the door, you know, opened the patio door, and I don't know if you've ever, well, of course you have, you know, where kind of like at sunset, where the light changes sometimes and everything looks golden. Everything is, you know, it's got this amazing coloring and light, and, you know, so that was going on, and it was mega, you know, amplified. And I looked to the left, and there's a tree in the backyard, and it is full of robins. And I mean, like, so full of robins, and they're making this cacophony. They're making this huge noise, sound, you know, singing and chirping and going on and on and on. And it was almost like, see, there's lots of us. You know, don't worry, one of them died. It's okay. You know, we live on. There's lots of us. I mean, you know, you think weird things. You don't know what to think, because this is what the mind does, right? This is what your left brain does. It tries to make sense of these things and figure it out when it might not have anything at all to do with what's really happening. But I was so overtaken, so overwhelmed by this scene and by everything that had just all happened, that that I wanted to step out into this world, because I had this feeling like, if I step out here, I'm gonna disappear. I'm gonna go into another realm, right? I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna step into this, and somehow, you know, I'm gonna be magically absolved or absorbed into it. And I couldn't do it. My foot wouldn't move. I tried to make myself step out there, and I couldn't move. And the feeling was like I was intruding on something sacred. That was the feeling. Like, you know, this is so numinous that for me to try to step out into it somehow was just my ego stuff, and that everything that was supposed to be happening was happening, and it had already happened, and no, that's it, you're done. And that's the robin story. Believe it or not, kids.
That is really fascinating, because robins do not behave like that. They don't people's doors. They don't gather in large groups in trees like that. They just don't do that. That's really interesting.
Well, the whole thing. I mean, that robin looking up at me like that, you know, and I felt like it was really just communicating with my soul. I felt like it was just really talking to me, you know, in such a big way. It was just unmistakable. So.
Well, then Grant wanted to ask you about flying the ship, which I did not know was part of this story. I want to hear that too.
Well, and you had said something about ports. So I've had a number of ports too. Did you want me to share the one about the fork, or no?
Well, that one I don't remember. We'll do that one, and the one with your father is pretty important. The one with your father.
Oh, that one, yeah. Okay, so.
But tell me the other one first.
About the tuning fork in the sky. I sent you the videos.
Oh, yeah.
Not the videos, the pictures. I
Yeah.
sent you the photos I took of it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one? Okay.
Yeah.
So with my dad passed away in 1990. And I moved to Colorado in 1993. And I was house sitting for a person. I hadn't yet found a place to live. I'd just gotten there. And I was house sitting for someone, and she was gone, and it was Christmas time. And that day I had gone to a chiropractor that I just met, and you know, he was one of these more esoteric type of folks, and we were working on, well, your pain is connected to your dad, kind of thing, you know. And so I took out a pad of paper, and I, you know, from my numerology bag, because we were doing a trade. I'm a numerologist, and we were doing a trade for chiropractic and numerology. So so I had my numerology bag there, and I took this pad of paper out, and I wrote down the stuff that he was saying about my dad, and you know, we had this emotional session. And then I left. And then that evening, it wasn't Christmas Eve, I think it was the night before Christmas Eve, but you know, Christmas time. And so I'm missing my dad and thinking about all this stuff. And I suddenly thought, you know, I want to look at those notes. I want to go, you know, check out those notes again. So I went to the bedroom where my stuff was, and I had put my numerology bag against the far wall from the door. And so I looked at the numerology bag as I'm heading over to it, and I see something sticking up out of my bag. And it's like a piece of paper that's folded, and the folded in, you know, it's folded in half, and the folded in is down in the bag, right? And the open part of it is sticking up out of the bag. And as I get closer to it, I can see that the writing on the top of the page there, and it says certificate of death. And I thought, what in the world is that? So I pull it out, and it's my dad's death certificate, which I had never seen. You know, it was I found out by looking at it right there that my brother-in-law had actually signed my dad's death certificate. You know, they want you to sign off on it. And so I was looking at, you know, this death certificate, and of course it's going through my head, how in the world could that possibly have gotten into my numerology bag? Why would it be sticking up out of it like that? And it's crisp too, like brand new. And he had died 3 years before. And of course I had cleaned out my numerology bag probably 100 times in 3 years, you know. So I knew that certificate was, not only had I never seen it, but it was certainly never in my bag. And if it had been, you know, with all the cleaning out, I would have seen it. Yeah. And so then I had a little fit, and I was telling my dad, well, why couldn't you send me, you know, your Rudyard Kipling book or something, your poems that you love. You have to send me your death certificate. Like he was saying to me, I'm dead, get over it, you know? So, you know, yeah. So that was really remarkable. That was a remarkable thing. That was very, you know, and I still don't know why I got the death certificate, other than, yeah, I don't know why, other than maybe that was just the way of illustrating something to me about the numinous, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And now go to the one with the flying the ship, because you basically describe what everybody else describes, and you describe it as a lot of people do, that it appeared to be a dream. Like a lot of people say, well, I don't think of it as a dream. And I say, well, everybody always says it's a dream. Tell me the story anyway. But it's the same dream that everybody else has.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting how there's these connected dreams. I know. So in the vision, which to me, I was dreaming, you know, I woke up from this, I guess, at some point and realized that, that this had happened. I wasn't awake in the dream. It wasn't a lucid dream. But I definitely, and I had never heard this anywhere from anybody or anything like this at the time. This was quite a while ago. And so I'm on the ship. The ship has a really, it's round, it has a rounded window that comes around almost to the sides like this. There's a big long panel that's got all kinds of stuff on it. And one of the things that's on it is a half dome, you know, that's there. And there are these beings on the ship, and I can't see them, but I sense them. I have a sense of these beings. And I don't remember if I was told to do this or I just did it. I kind of think I just did it, from what I remember. I think I just did it. I just put my hand over the dome. I didn't touch it. I just hovered over the top of it, and I knew that that I could tell the ship, you know, or I could move the ship. I could fly the ship wherever I wanted it to go by putting my hand over this thing. And it was like I just thought, oh, I want to go over there, and then we were there, and it was like my consciousness and the ship were the same. It was like as if the ship itself had decided it wanted to go there, you know. So yeah. Lost your I can't hear you.
That is so reminiscent of other people. Even you raised a new detail where you said that the beings were there, but you didn't know whether they were. Is exactly what other people say. There's these beings behind me, and I don't know if they're human or alien. They're just there. And then the other thing where I don't know whether they told me, and some people would say they were standing there, and then they got a voice that said, "Go ahead and do it." And they said, "Do what?" I don't know what to do. You know what to do. And it's this idea, this same similarity of these stories. They're identical stories. And the idea that you become one with the craft, and whatever you think is what the craft does is fascinating that you had that. And you're probably the first, after I heard in 2013, I think you were the first person that I heard that story from. And I was just so fascinated that you were telling basically the same story. And it's
no, you told me, Grant, at that time that it was in 2013 that I told you about it, but I'd had it, you know, I'd had that experience long before. But when I told you about it, you said that you had been connecting with a number of other people at that point.
Because that's when I had that. Yeah, like 2013 is when I gave the lecture when this what's her name? I can't remember her name anymore. She told me, and I thought she was totally nuts when she first, because she was in her 70s. And I said, "You flew the ship?" I'm not thinking, like, I was going to say, "Get out of here, you're crazy." I mean, it's like insane, because it didn't make any sense that people, that they would allow you or teach you to fly the ship. And it's all women, like very few men, mostly women. You know, that, you know, if you're in Saudi Arabia, until last year, you couldn't drive a car. But if you get taken by the aliens, they'll let you fly the ship, you know, no license, no insurance or whatever. Now, you mentioned numbers. Sinead is big time into numbers. I'm sort of into numbers. So maybe start off with 333 and give us your numerology, a little bit about numerology and how that fits in.
Yeah. So, you know, Pythagoras said all is number, and he was referring to the qualitative aspect of number rather than the quantitative, having to do with archetypal energies. And when you think about everything being energy and then number as the representation, archetypal representation of those energies, you know, then it can be applied to absolutely everything. So every number 1 through 9 has a particular archetypal quality that can be applied to everything connected with that archetype, right? So, so the master numbers, are interesting because they represent the higher octave. If you are familiar with music, it's like there's this note here, and then if you go 8 notes above, that note repeats itself only at a higher level. And so the master numbers are like that. They're the higher octave of this lower digit sum. So in other words, all the numbers that double themselves, 11, 22, 33, are master numbers that represent, the 11 represents the higher octave of 2. But we always say them together, 11, 2, because the higher energy is very high octane, very electrical. It's very, you couldn't live there all the time. You would burn up. So what happens is we tap into those master energies briefly for inspiration, for receptivity, and then we come back down and live the lower digit sum of the number. So even people that have master numbers in their chart, it's not that they're at that level all the time. It's that that's available to them, right? So that they can tap into that energy. And 33 is considered the master number of the highest level of compassion. It's the Christ number. And it's the highest level of compassion, having to do with sacrifice, self-sacrifice and unconditional love at the highest level. So when the master number 33 appears, to me, it's always a signal about compassion. It's always a signal about having compassion. And it's kind of like an awakener. The master numbers are here to awaken us to these qualities of energy in ourselves, to remind us, hey, there's that also. One other thing I want to say, though, about the repetition of master numbers that a lot of people report. We were talking earlier about how when you get ignited or you get impacted by an event, how it's not creative necessarily, but attractive, where you start attracting more experiences. The master numbers are exactly like that. When you see 1111 or 3333 or something like that, you get fascinated, and the fascination becomes attractive. So you become attracted to it, and therefore you start seeing it more. So, I think that that's a component that people overlook. They want to attach a lot more meaning to the fact that they're seeing more and more and more of these things. And there could also be a reason for their attachment. Maybe they need to be reminded over and over again of that particular quality of energy. That might also be happening.
What if you see numbers 3 times? Like there's Grant and I talked about this during one of the interviews we did, and then there were so many responses to that particular thing in the interview about numbers. So what if a number shows up more than twice? Like, so instead of 22 or 1111, it could be 333.
Yeah. So those are master numbers also. Anytime the numbers double themselves or triple themselves or quadruple themselves, that's always master level energy, because it is pointing to more higher level frequencies. So, they're higher level frequencies.
So have you had any conjunction of numbers specifically into any of these other experiences that you've had? I mean, you talked about triangles. I guess you could say the 3, but depending on how you interpret it, I guess. But have you had numbers incorporate themselves into other experiences you've had in ways that felt meaningful?
Yeah. The way I got into numerology, actually, 78, 79, I noticed a really strange correlation between my children's birth certificates. It was a strange number correlation, and I didn't understand it. I was like, what is that? So I went to an astrologer and said, I found this in my kids' birth certificates. She said, oh, you need a numerologist. So I went to this numerologist, and she then proceeded to give me this reading on my kids that only a mother would know, and I was just astounded by what she had to say and by the correlations and by what she was doing. So this was yet another example to me. It was another opening for me in terms of energy manifesting in the world, right? And how everything is energetic and how everything is connected, how it's all, how it's all connected. It's all one.
Speaking of how things operate in the world, you've been sharing experiences with us of things that have happened to you. What is currently happening for you? What's your experience right now of perhaps unusual or paranormal things that might be happening in your life?
Well, I had something happen the other day, and again, I'm going to make this connection between connecting with the energy and things happening, because there are certain catalysts, there are certain triggers, certain things that happen that then it's like opening a door, and then you can close that door, and then things don't happen for a really long time, because you're not connecting with the energy for whatever reason. You've shut yourself off, and so there are certain people that have been catalytic for me in terms of experiences, and Grant Cameron is one of those folks. I've had many strange things happen with Grant. Right after meeting him, I had my clock went backwards, and so that's another story for another time. But I had noticed that every time I start to connect with Grant, things start to happen, right? So when you guys contacted me for this interview, I hadn't really been communicating too much with Grant, but then suddenly I started thinking about all these things. I started, bringing stuff up and looking at it, and then suddenly I started having experiences. So I had a couple of things happen where I took photos outside. I was outside walking my dog, and I took the photos, and there was this object in the photo that went from and I took two photos back to back, one right after the other. And in the first one, there's an object at the bottom of this cloud. There's a series of clouds, they're all strung together there. And then you can see in the next picture, those clouds have not moved at all. I mean, even if they were moving really slowly, they would be a little bit apart from one another or something, So there was no movement because those pictures were taken back to back. In the second picture, that same object is now way up above the cloud at the very end, right? It's up above there. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And so then I think it was the next day or a couple days later, I'm out with my dog again, and walking on the trail, I see this white feather on the ground, and it's kind of a solid, how some feathers are more solid and more packed together. And so I picked it up and I turned it over, and the other side, it was kind of brown and had some other stuff. I thought, oh, that's not a white feather, When I think about white feathers, I think about pure white feathers. And so I thought, well, okay, because put it down. Of course, we want to see white feathers, yeah. And so I put the feather down and I kept walking. And within, like, I would say 5 minutes of walking ahead, all of a sudden there on the ground, and I actually have it right here, was this white feather. I mean, it was like right there on the ground, right in front of me. I mean, right in front of me, right on where I'm walking, right there, white feather. So yeah. So
there's a sense of humor behind that. It feels like there's a little bit of like he like whimsicality behind that experience.
Oh, yeah. I think the consciousness and these energies are infinitely humorous. We should definitely not take them so seriously. We should definitely keep our sense of humor around all of it.
That's where I always call it the theory of wow. And I think George Hansen had called it the trickster thing, where the way they get your attention, the way they lead you is with the weird stuff. Because if it wasn't weird, you wouldn't, when it's weird, you spend your whole time for years trying to figure out what is this about, and they've got your attention. And that's in some theories, that's all they want to do is make you almost like there's one expression about Jacques Vallée. It's all just a giant kabuki theater, and the only message is you're not alone.
Yeah, yeah, I think that too. I think everything in existence points to the eternality of life. You know, it all points to the fact that not only is it one, but it's eternal. It's eternally ongoing, and you know that's an interesting thing to contemplate.
Well, Candace, I wanted to ask you, you know, I know just from talking to Grant over the last few weeks that we haven't even gotten through maybe a fraction of the experiences that you've had, but how have these experiences changed you and changed your life? Because they've started really early on for you, as they have for many of us, right? That we might have an awakening later on in life, but we realize, oh, these have actually been happening to me all through my life. So it takes a while for that to process, you know, for us to be able to process these things, understand them, and integrate them. But how has this changed who you are, your outlook, your, you know, how you approach life, how you deal with other people? How has it changed your life?
Boy, that's a lot to unpack there. I would say that because I had experiences so early, I don't have a lot to compare it with in terms of how I was before and then how I was after, because I think it's kind of always been a part of me somehow. And but I can say that I certainly have gone from being fearful about some things that I didn't understand, you know, that were high strangeness at a level that, especially when it impacted me personally. I have one experience which I haven't shared, and I probably won't, but it was something that was ongoing for years and years and years, and I was afraid in the beginning. I was totally frightened because it was very close and personal to me, and so I think I wasted a lot of time wondering about that and trying to use my left brain to figure it out instead of embracing the fact that this was yet again something in the universe that is there to remind us, and that's all, you know. So that's been a big part. The fear has definitely shifted for me. I don't have the same level of fear and consternation about these things. I do see it all in a bigger picture view, and feel that, you know, I mean, even death is about life, right? Yeah. Excuse me.
Thank you. So I guess it's just helped you learn to trust a bit more what you're experiencing.
Well, I'll say one more thing about it, and that's that I think life, love, and truth are synonymous. You know, I think that love is the highest expression of life, and that you know, that is really the oneness, and that's how we can come to understand it. It's almost like consciousness is this big soup in which individual attention and choice become the vehicles of expression and form. But that's guided by the intention of oneness. So, you know, even though we have this illusion of individuality and singularity in that sense, that we're you know, we're doing all this stuff and we're making all this stuff up, that actually it's all part of a bigger thing that's happening that we don't have any control over. We don't know anything about. And so surrender then becomes a bigger part of my approach to life from that sense.
Wow. We're going to have to do another show because I want to get into music and downloads and your son. I think we can maybe talk a little bit about your son's musical career, and there's so many things we haven't discussed, but I can say you're very eloquent in the way you have. It seems like you've spent a lot of time thinking this out, doing a lot of study on this, You're always sort of on the forefront in terms of an understanding that I think is probably exactly where it should be. And I'm honored to have known you and to have heard your stories, and now we can share it with other people. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this, as bizarre as it is, because it is pretty weird when you're having one thing after another. But to me, it's meant a lot to me to have heard your stuff, and to you've sort of verified a lot of the things that were just ideas, and then I would talk to you, and you would have a story that would fit in and make me say, yeah, I'm on the right track here. I've got this sort of going in the right direction. So, and we talk a little bit about Boulder, because you were part of starting Boulder Exo, and Boulder's a place where people may not know. You guys had a big group there. I mean, it's one of the biggest groups in the country in terms of the consciousness is, I think, higher in Boulder. You have a lot of people biking there. You have a lot of recycling food, and it's like a completely different world than the rest of the country. And so you sort of fit into that environment. So there's so many things I would like to really talk to you about as well, that I think that if we share with people, it would uplift other people, because it has uplifted me with having known you and having you add these stories to what I know.
We need a part 2 for sure. We definitely need a part 2.
Oh. Well, thank you, Grant. Thanks so much. It's you have impacted my life in many ways. I can't begin to tell you. And so another part of the synchronistic aspect of my life, for sure. And I've met so many wonderful people through you as well, including Sinead. So lovely to meet you and be with you.
You too.
Yeah.
One last question, and we'll shut it down. Do you had that group that you put together when I was there last time? You had the guy with the near-death experience with the jet engine, and very fascinating group. Have you done that since I was there?
No, that was just for you.
Oh, okay. I'll have to come back. I'll do it again.
Yeah, that was a special thing we did.
That was a really good sharing group. It was a lot of people there who almost like the sort of the typical, what I see as I always call Boulder, the consciousness Colorado, where these people are at this very high level, and you're sitting in there and going like, wow, I mean, these people know so much stuff that I don't know. And so I was really honored to be a part of that group that you put together. So when I come back to Boulder, whenever they open the border, and maybe Sinead can come, we can go around and meet some of the people and have another meeting like that. That was fascinating that you set that up for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason we set it up for you is because of all that you know, Grant. I mean, you're just like a total fountain of information and insight. And yeah, absolutely. It was our honor to have you, for sure. And everybody was definitely moved by things that you shared there, as well as things that you share so many places all over the place. And we're just very grateful for your presence on the planet.
Wow. And say hi to your son. How is he doing?
Good. He's doing okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Beautiful. Well, we'll have another part 2, and we'll get into music, and we'll get into downloads, because you've got a lot in that field as well. That you're very right-brained. You've gone through all this stuff, and thank you for being with us today and sharing the stories that I know you never want to be public, but I always thought, well, people got to know this story. I mean, this is so I've sort of forced you out on a lot of the stuff, and I apologize for that, but I think people need to know, because I think you have a lot of stuff that people should know about.
Well, you made the process really easy, Grant. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. Honored that you're interested.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sinead.
Hear your story, Candace. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing it with us. I know you had some mixed feelings, but like Grant is saying, a lot of people will benefit from hearing this. So I'm looking forward to part 2 already.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. I'm happy if any of it does any good at all.